Good morning, everyone. This is our weekly Fly on the Wall podcast, and unlike most weeks, this week it is going to be posted publicly here on YouTube, which is sort of obvious for those of you listening to it here. We do this show weekly. It is normally just done on our website, suspiciousobservers.org, but since there are quite a number of new people, thanks to Bright Insight, who we're going to more properly thank in just a moment, it might be more relevant to deviate from our strict, concise morning news videos and our very on-point series videos about Earth catastrophe cycle, much related to the CIA document that was declassified, and actually explain what this channel is and who we are, and the fact that I actually know of the channel Bright Insight. Think he's a lot like a lot of the viewers at this channel, the whole awake, seeking truth, and looking in a lot of the same directions as well. It would not surprise me to find out that there was actually already a lot of crossover between us. Anyway, real quickly, I would love to introduce the folks who are on this every week. My name is Ben Davidson. I am the founder of Space Weather News and the Mobile Observatory Project and this Suspicious Observers YouTube channel. Here with me is the director of our Plasma Lab, Billy Yelverton. He's down in Leesburg, Georgia. Billy, you want to say hi to everyone so they can hear what your voice sounds like?
How y'all doing, folks?
Awesome. Terrific. Up next is going to be Xavier Thunders. He lives in Rochester, New York. Much usually the coldest individual on the call, given his latitude. Xavier, you want to say hi to everyone real fast? Xavier does our animations for some of the videos around here.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Terrific. We also have Tony Rango on from the radio show Guns and Butter. Many of you probably know that show. Tony is currently located in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. Tony, you want to say hello to everybody?
Yeah, the early version. Good morning.
Yes, the early version. Yes, clicky. Todd Kleckner from Nine Risay is on the line as well. He's another weekly contributor. Todd, would you like to say hello from Albuquerque?
Good morning.
Yeah, there we go. And rounding out, of course, is my childhood best friend, Adrian D'Amico, founder of the Suspect Sky YouTube channel, and is also heavily involved in this Earth catastrophe cycle series as well. Adrian, would you like to say hello from Pittsburgh?
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Terrific. For those who are new to the channel, indeed, every single day, 365 days a year, we do an update on the sun, Earth, earthquakes, weather, space science news, and other science news that are coming out of labs and other theorists that are relating to the sun, the weather, space, cosmology, and, in fact, Earth's catastrophe cycle. We have that daily show. We are, of course, doing a series. Most of the new viewers here from Bright Insight, plugging the episode 1 of the series, might not know that it is actually a 22-episode series at this point. Those 22 episodes have come out in the last 115 days or so since that first episode came out. And this is what we do on a weekly basis over on the website, and figured we might as well, since we end up making a few of these public every year, might as well make it today so that I can properly thank Bright Insight for that wonderful plug. It's always nice to see people who do not only proper research, but proper communication as well, looking into the same kinds of things that we are. It really helps the people who think in this kind of way and who really are able to learn in this kind of way. As I mentioned, I do know Bright Insight's channel, really like the way it's communicated, and the information is presented, and I really like the open-mindedness there. So big thank you, much respect, and big welcome to everybody who is here. So what we do is we are going to go down some of the links that you can find posted beneath the video, and we do this every week, and we sort of go over the importance and talk about them in a bit more detail, maybe a bit more than a bit more detail than we are able to do in our 5 to 6 minute morning show where we're quickly hitting all of these different topics. And so that first link we have down there is to a slowdown in the Atlantic. Now, we covered this in the news this week, and this is really important because there are a number of things going on right now that are driving towards a break in the global warming pattern, so to speak, if I can put it that way. And these are really going to be coming together over the next 30 to 40 years and really having their effects. One is in the Pacific, one is in the Arctic, one is on the Sun, one is in the southern oceans, but this one we're focusing on here today, this is on this incredible conveyor belt of circulation in the Atlantic. And when it slows down, basically charges towards a shutdown, it doesn't actually shut down fully. It has really drastic effects. This is when Europe sees its coldest periods. This happened during a number of the times when we can tell that Europe had their really bad cold periods into the past, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, times like this. It is because the warm water that is in the equatorial region of the Atlantic does not run up the western side of the Atlantic, which would be the eastern side of the United States, and then up into Canada, and warm the northern waters. And that basically keeps the far western side of the Atlantic, again, the one hugging the eastern side of the United States, a bit warmer, which doesn't generate more hurricanes necessarily, but it adds to the strength of the ones that make their northern turn before they get to Florida and charge the East Coast, areas like the Carolinas, Virginia, or ones that make it up further north, like Hurricane Sandy. Those ones, in theory, should be having more strength because of this. That's really the major consequence in terms of the heat being kept there. Unfortunately, when this cools Europe, that has major effects on the entire northern hemisphere. That affects Siberia and then the Americas in the span of anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 winters. And when you combine that with the fact that we expect solar forcing across at least no less than 10 parameters to be dropping precipitously this century, coming off the grand solar maximum of 400 years, which took place in the latter part of the 1900s. This combining with a freshening of the Southern Ocean, which is well known to precede many glacial periods, the lack of strength in the upper jets, that being the jet stream and the polar vortex events, really do put a different perspective on climate change, where there's more than just this one-sided global warming to worry about, because there's a lot of things in different parts of the world, and we're not going to dive deep into what's happening in the southern oceans or in the Pacific, because we've done that in previous episodes. But it's almost like a bit of serendipitous magic that all these things are basically going to be turning towards cold phase in the next couple of years to decades, in most of our lives, one could say. I want to use the next 2 links that we're going to be talking about to really dive into what some of the new viewers are here to see, and what some of the, what I would say most of our current viewers are most interested in outside of the daily rundowns, and that is Earth's catastrophe cycle. Now, smack dab in the middle of these 22 episodes, we do a couple that involve Mars to a significant detail. And the next 2 links we have right there being that rivers raged on Mars late into its history, and that there is new evidence of deep groundwater on Mars. We already learned last year that there is probably an underground lake at the South Pole. Turns out that seems to be the case everywhere, and even up near the surface. We only see the red dust, but really, if you go even just down a few inches, you find it's just layer after layer of red dust, sublimated ice that falls down in the nighttime, covered up by red dust during the daytime in the winds and the phenomenal sand and dust storms. It really makes you wonder if Mars is really all that dead, especially since we saw in just today's morning show here on the channel that there's a phenomenal amount of life ingredients on Mars, much more than they realized. And this is due to a number of things, including asteroid impacts and its interaction with the hydrogen. Not only the hydrogen that's there, but that which comes in much more constantly than it does here on Earth, due to the fact that Mars does not have a magnetic field, a global magnetic field. In many ways, some of the solar wind has significantly stronger effects on the surface features. And so one has to question whether or not just beneath the surface of Mars, and we know that there's tons of deep caverns on this planet, The rocky crust of Mars is not that dissimilar to Earth that we wouldn't expect some of the same things there, especially since we know that it once had massive ocean, running rivers. We know that there's underground lakes still. We know that there's been volcanic activity. There's got to be lava tubes. I think that apart from the atmospheric chemistry, what you'd have to breathe, there's a shocking similarity between Mars and Earth. And if one can get themselves to, in either direction in time, whether there were past human civilizations on this planet that have been lost, maybe some of them had the technology to actually get off of this planet, maybe they came to this planet from somewhere else, or maybe we're talking about in the future where we might go. The body of evidence here, like I said, the second and third links here, plus what we saw this morning in the news show, these really paint a different picture of Mars than a formerly potentially habitable planet. It certainly isn't as friendly, looks much more foreboding than we imagine it did back when it had its global ocean and might have even had its global magnetic field. We do know that it cooled much, much faster than Earth did. Or Earth still is, I should say. But anyway, really interesting stuff there on Mars. And we tie this in to Earth's catastrophe cycle because what episode 1 doesn't do is go into really the cause of this. And it really does look like there's something external. The evidence from the sun and the galaxy, both from a theoretical and an actual evidence standpoint, not only on Earth but on the moon and on Mars as well, is quite compelling. And part of the story would be that Mars had something terrible happen to it, and that maybe Mars had this happen to it not over millions and billions of years, but a large portion of it happened relatively quickly. And I think that there's a lot of evidence on Mars to suggest that, in fact, that is the case. In fact, specifically that episode that showed the 3 random crustal magnetic anomalies in the exact orientation as the Tharsis Montes triple volcano line, but a few hundred miles away, almost as if they were once lined up with the volcanoes and then the entire crust just shifted over top of them. This story of a catastrophe on the planet, while if you have only seen episode 1, that appears to be extreme and under-inclusive of the entire picture. There's evidence of this everywhere. It is a solar system-wide, if not galaxy-wide event. And the evidence for that in the Earth's Catastrophe Cycle series and on the Suspect Sky channel as he and his collaborator Gary Long were the ones who actually went and found the missing pages of that book. They actually got the whole thing, and it's not just the pages in between the chapters. I won't spoil it too much, but the evidence is amazing. Not just that this is the information they chose to hide back in the 60s, but just a few years ago when they declassified and heavily sanitized some of it, exactly what they decided needed to be hidden again in that sanitization. And so this is a topic that we obviously can't go through everything right here on this week's show. We do have a number of other links to get to. But definitely, this is something that has as much evidence for it as anything else long-term or at grand scale. This has way more evidence than something like dark matter or for a Milankovitch cycle-driven 100,000-year ice age cycle. This thing is real, and unfortunately, it does look like the timeline is somewhere between 10 to 15,000 years. A lot of people like to focus on this 12,000-year number, and we do know the last time this major event happened, at least from the evidence on Earth, was really the Younger Dryas and then our coming out of it, which was, somewhere between 11 and 13,000 years ago. So very important, very interesting topic. Does anybody want to have any little comments here before we take our first little break?
Really quick, because I'd also like to plug the conference, but at OTF, Observing the Frontier, which is a yearly conference that this channel kind of hosts, August Dunning did tie a lot of the Mars evidence to this. So if anyone's interested on the Mars end of it all, definitely go check out that video.
Absolutely. That's a great point. So for those who don't know who Dr. August Dunning is, he started off his career at NASA's JPL, and he still technically holds his visiting or adjunct professorship at Caltech. That's quite the little resume there, but he does spend most of his time doing his own projects and some of his commercial work now, and hanging out and chatting with people like me. He has long been a proponent of the evidence that something like a star metal impactor hit Mars. Like at some point, maybe like a massive gas giant planet or a rogue star came in, hit a planet that used to be in the asteroid belt, and then broke apart, and some of that crashed into Mars, which would be the explanation in his mind for some of the crustal magnetic fields. The evidence he has for it is sound, but he himself never loved his idea of how the star metal got there, because it literally required a star to come through and crash into that planet, break it apart like that. And he's now looking at this from a stellar and galactic scale, where literally we don't need a star to come in and intrude. We've got the star here and we're already in the galaxy. And again, not going to go into all the details, but that's in there a couple of times somewhere in those 22 episodes. I can't remember which ones those are in right now. August Dunning does appear in, I think, 3 or 4 of the episodes. So again, the whole thing is definitely worth watching. We'll actually put a link to that down there below the video as well. And again, on Suspect Sky channel too. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick little break over here on our end so that I can get a drink of water and everybody else can get a little break from hearing me talk. It'll seem like just a few moments for you guys, so see you in a second. All right, we are back after that long and painstaking break. We're going to quickly go through the next 2 links we have right there. And hopefully we can get some minor little discussions about the implications of these before we get to our last link there, and then a little bit of discussion that does not have a link at the end. So that first link you have right there, really simple. Jupiter did not form where it is now. It has had a major migration. And the reason this is interesting is because a lot of the people who have in the past theorized on this catastrophe cycle of Earth have pointed to the stories of the ancients of battles taking place in the sky, especially the activity of Mars and Venus, and the prominence and importance of Jupiter and Saturn to these people. It's really not, it doesn't make sense with our modern, calm, steady sky, and especially with how tame of a sight Saturn is, traipsing across the sky every 30 years. And so, they tell stories of God's coming, God's leaving, and they're talking, of course, about the planets in chaos. And somebody is sending images around. Billy, is that you? What are you sending here?
I hit the wrong button.
You hit the wrong button? Oh, okay, it's all right. Well, Billy is accidentally creating noise here on the thing, but it's okay. But yeah, so that first link we have right there, or that next link, that's really, it's one of maybe 7 or 8 we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years that really point to the stories of the ancients and say, oh yes, this actually did happen. However, there's a major discrepancy, because all of these papers say these things happened actually hundreds of millions or billions of years ago, and it's just a coincidence that our ancestors tell the same story. That's a hurdle that's really hard for me to get over, especially if these cycles are happening on a much shorter time scale than people realize. Does anybody else have difficulty with it being a random coincidence that our ancestors tell the same story that the scientists do, but the scientists are saying that it's happening much beforehand, and it's really the scientists that are sort of implying it's a coincidence that our ancestors are telling the same stories?
Yeah, I think that's a big problem, and I also think that this article, as well as many that have come out recently, for those who may be new to this channel, may lend some support to the primordial sun theory. That our solar system was not based off of our current sun, and that we became a captured object, and that potentially there was a series of catastrophes that happened as part of that change in the structure of the solar system happened. And it is, a very odd coincidence that, we have all these different cultures talking about these catastrophic events and the things in the sky and the big battles between the gods, which would have been, the planets that comprise the original primordial solar system. But I also think that, there's a lot of assumptions that happened in mainstream science. So while they might find evidence of things like Jupiter's migration or, these ancient stories, they might interpret that in a way that only makes sense to them if these things happened millions of years ago. So there might be sort of an implied assumption happening there with mainstream science in interpreting this data.
It also would not be the first time that we saw scientists saying something without saying something, realizing that, they have to keep their jobs, they have to keep their grants, and they can't be laughed out of a science journal. So they basically they go as far as they can go without getting in trouble scientifically, so to speak. We do know that takes place. We've seen that in a number of realms. And it's really interesting that you mentioned the primordial sun, because when I mentioned all those articles about the migration and things like that, there's about 10 more about Mercury surviving an inner system pileup, about there being more planets in the inner system, about Earth maybe not forming where it is right now. And in addition, based on some of the rare elemental composition that they're finding in the asteroids and even here on Earth and in the moon, they're thinking that there had to have been a second star here nearby right at the start of our solar system, and it actually novaed. And that's where all of our heavy elements came from. Now, I don't know if I buy that exact explanation. I think that if the sun has catastrophic outbursts, that could explain it as well, given the fact that NASA's found every known element in the solar wind, just the ambient solar wind that comes out every second of every day. So in these huge bursts, that's another way to look at it. But the point is that mainstream science is exploring these things to the extent that it can, which is, of course, always a really, really fun idea. But anyway,
and I'd like to point out.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd like to point out that these aren't just stories. Remember that they actually chiseled this stuff into stone and marked it for a long time. So it was not just a story to tell, but something to leave for generations.
Right, and it's interesting because it's not like picking up a piece of paper and a pencil. You don't just chisel anything down into stone. These were meaningful things that they did. And I've always found it interesting that from multiple parts of the world, there are stories of Earth and Uranus being first, Saturn being a product of that, and then Jupiter, Neptune, and Hades being a part of that. And I don't know if Hades would be what got destroyed in the asteroid belt or if that's supposed to be the sun. But why do those stories exist? And why is there a coherence?
They also.
Did I lose you?
I was just going to say, in addition to chiseling these things into stone, they also ancient cultures built megalithic structures designed to survive catastrophes and to survive for millennia. And it's not just one ancient culture; it's nearly every ancient culture across the world that were disparate and disconnected and had no cultural connection, no physical interaction with one another, and they all reached the same conclusion. We need to build things to survive that point to the sky, and have architectural relationships to the sky, and they leave messages about this stuff.
Right.
So were they doing this in preparation for a catastrophe? Were there ancient human civilizations before even what we call ancient human civilizations that they needed to record this information so that future generations after the next catastrophe could maybe piece the puzzle together? Who knows? And then not to go too far out there, but there is very interesting structural elements found on Mars and the Moon. The Sidonian pyramid complex, contains all this geometric relationships to the golden ratio and things. And, were these messages left from ancient human civilizations? It's a fascinating theory.
It really is.
Yeah. There's not to forget that in Sumerian text, Jupiter was actually named Nibiru.
Yeah, that is one of the lesser known but more important ideas that. Go ahead.
There's something really positive about the article too, because it doesn't seem long ago that they were thinking there wasn't enough matter far enough out for Jupiter and the gas giants to form, and now they're talking about migrations and stuff, and whatever ends up being right, I just love the fact that at least people are looking into it, and they're looking into it in a subtle way. They're not trying to rewrite anything too dramatically, and it's almost like they're throwing things against the wall to see what'll stick. But I love the fact that this whole topic is finally not settled science like it was just 5 years ago.
Right. It's not taboo to. Well, it's still technically taboo in mainstream science to say it happened in a time frame that our ancestors knew about, but at least we can talk about it in that way now, which is nice. So I would like
a little bit of a less optimistic perspective, if I might just add. So a few decades ago, water was considered to be extremely rare in the universe, right? And then now we know it's not. There's water all over the place, particularly your star water theory, but also recent findings on Mars, right? The underground water, the plume seen in Enceladus and whatnot. But when we think about our exploration of Mars, we've landed a few rovers, right? They can cover a few. A couple miles, maybe a few square 100 yards, and that's it. And we determine it's a dead planet. But a few months ago, there was an article about methane gas fluctuations and what produces these fluctuations on Earth, at least, bacteria. So there could be, like you mentioned, a very robust ecosphere underground in Mars. We just can't find it because our rovers can't find it. But what worries me about kind of mainstream investigations of this stuff is a lot of it becomes politicized. And we see that particularly with what was once called global warming, then called extreme weather, and then now called climate change, whatever that means. But in the mainstream, they define climate change as being changes to the climate caused by human activity. And I think what you and a lot of other researchers, but you in particular, are finding, this solar influence, right? And then now these Atlantic current influences and all these other things that are kind of left out of the CMIP climate change model. But you don't really hear about that because the issue's so politicized. You only hear about humanity's influence and that's it. And that kind of worries me in terms of educating the general public, because most people don't know that the climate change models used lack a series of inputs that are now assumed presently to be caused by humans. And what worries me about that is how can we understand the catastrophe cycles properly if we are not understanding the changes in our own climate properly, and we're politicizing the issue and we're not sort of educating the masses about it. And it's sort of taboo to even talk about it because it's become so politicized.
Well, I will thank Adrian for both summarizing about 3 to 5 years of my climate research in a few seconds, and also summarizing the general way we have to look at science as a whole in the world today, where we do have something called mainstream science and alternative views. That was a nice little summary. I would love to move on now so that we get to all these topics. We're going to step away from the catastrophe cycle topic and series for just a minute here, because this article that is up next, this what I'm calling an extrastellar ionizer required. It's really important for understanding cosmology and what will one day be the end of the dark matter paradigm. Now, they already can't find it. They already see evidence at various places that is conflicting with the lambda cold dark matter model, which is the standard model of cosmology at present. And this one in particular, it is, again, one in a long line of indicators that It's dark only in the sense that we're not seeing it. You don't need to invent new mysterious particles. And so those mysterious particles are supposed to interact somewhat gravitationally, but not with light, not with electromagnetism, none of that. What they're discovering here is that there's way more photoionization, basically electromagnetic interaction to higher electromagnetic energy states, in the empty areas of the cosmos than is possible based on the starlight to which they have access from galaxies, etc. And so there is this photoionization, or maybe not even photoionization, but some kind of ionization actor going on in the cosmos. It's not dark matter and something that doesn't interact electromagnetically. It is an electromagnetic actor. And that is imparting a considerable amount of charge, of ionization. And in fact, we learned just a few weeks ago that it is actually much more than they're even accounting for here, because the dust is hiding a lot of it. The moment those ions hit a piece of dust, the dust still looks like dust if it's more than just, even a micrometer in length. It still just emits in those submillimeter and infrared wavelengths if it's hot enough. And it doesn't tell you that it's holding on to those electrons and those ions. We learned that in situ at Enceladus. And so, what is the answer? Well, the answer is, as has been proposed by plasma universe physicists for more than 100 years, is that the vast majority of the material in the cosmos is not what we see as stars and planets and galaxies, but it's the diffuse, tiny material, the dust and the plasma, inside and all around it. And while we are getting better at seeing these things, it's a scratch at the surface in terms of viewing dust and plasma at the cosmic levels. For those who are relatively new and don't know this before, they had a Langmuir probe and a magnetometer on Cassini. They flew it through the South Pole jets of Enceladus. They know how much electric current was there because of the magnetometer readings, but the Langmuir probe missed 95% of the current because it was too attracted to the dust. Now, if we can fly right through an electric current in space and miss 95% of it, we don't see anything at a cosmic level. We see nothing, absolutely nothing, especially when there's extra dust blocking it and in the way. And we're trying to look hundreds to thousands to millions of light years away. Just no chance. We don't see any of it. And so the plasma that is out there and interacting, the galactic and cosmic scale electric fields and magnetic fields are the answer here. They are the source of that charge and the source of that ionization. They move through the cosmic web, feeding plasma and gas into galaxies. This is known in mainstream science, but they never put together the fact that when you have charged material flowing in a filament to galaxies and feeding them, that is a current. That is an electric current doing that. And when it's an electric current, it's got magnetic fields associated with it, which is producing more electric fields all around it and electric currents through them. Very, very important topic there. Billy, go ahead. I know that you...
Yeah, all you have to do is look at the vacuum tube amplifier circuit, and this shows exactly how, energy can be amplified as it crosses another field of electricity.
Right. That's how, isn't that how they get X-rays?
The same vacuum tube does create X-rays, but it's all in the configuration. If you take, a light beam would be considered an electric filament, and cross it perpendicular with another electric filament, that will pick up charge from the intersection.
Right.
And amplify, in layman's terms, make it stronger than it was previously.
Right.
Simple.
No, that makes a ton of sense, because there's a couple of ways you can ionize something. You can heat it to the point where literally the atoms break apart, electrons shift energy levels, and you basically got your subatomic particles. That's really difficult to do. You can hit it with an electron or a gamma ray or a proton or an X-ray, or you can hit it with a high, and that X-ray and the gamma ray, those are high energy photons. That's technically called photo ionization. Basically, when it's ultraviolet damaging, your DNA and you get skin cancer, whether it's X-ray, gamma ray, those things are known as photo ionization. And so, Billy, you're absolutely right that a beam of light would add some of that energy. And even if it doesn't make it to the point where it's ionizing, even the visible light we see does impart some energy when those photons hit something. It might not do it to the point where it creates another, a tick up from, say, oh, this ion was +2, now it's +3. It might not do that, but still, there are those interactions, and those are the interactions that are not well taken into account. In fact, we saw just a couple of weeks ago that phenomenal paper that demonstrated that the photoelectric effect of the photons in the galaxy is not taken into account in the galactic dynamics. They basically blame everything on dark matter. Well, even if you presume that a photon has no mass, which is ridiculous because it makes E = mc squared completely ridiculous. It would mean that the energy of a photon is 0. Whether it's gamma rays, radio waves, it's complete nonsense. And so a photon does have to have some mass. Or the wave field vibrational structure of the essence of the photon manifests in this universe as mass, for those of you who just can't get your head out of a holographic universe type stuff, and I know there's a bunch of you here. So, but it manifests and presents itself as something that does have mass. And that mass and the electric effect of it are not taken into account at the galactic level. We're talking about things made of stars that throw off photons everywhere. And, the pieces are all coming together as dark matter fails time after time after time. And it's really just wonderful to see. Now, I can feel Tony Rango wanting to talk about this fluoride article, this last link that we have there. And so, I do talk about this cosmology and electric stuff just about every week, so we won't beat that horse too badly now. Just wanted to reshare that link and give it perspective. But now I do want to get on to that last link. And Tony, do you want to start us off here any way you want to?
Most definitely.
Go ahead,
So
buddy.
I was bothered and disgusted by the article. One is that it admits the toxicity of fluoride or fluorine, and then they're like, well, but it enhances the pharmaceutical effect, so we'll just toss it in there. So they're basically admitting that we need to make them more effective, but we're going to give you toxic substance to do so. So I was kind of disgusted by that. And I was bothered by the fact that it doesn't talk about the largest consumption of fluoride in the U.S. is put into our water supply, and they didn't even mention that. About the hydrofluorosilicic acid that we pump into our water supply that is not even pharmaceutical grade fluoride. It's actually worse than that, given where we get it and source it. So I was really shocked by the article.
That's a great point. I do remember seeing that one thing about how some of it comes from China, actually. It's basically their toxic waste, and instead of having to deal with it and pay to process it, we pay them to give it to us so we can put it in our water supply. And it is absolutely outlandish that was not part of this, especially because we have seen since at least 2012, and this might actually go back before 2012, I don't know for sure, but the first one I saw was 2012. 3 papers out of Harvard Medicine saying that the fluoride treatments that in the water and at the dentist's office are dropping people's IQs. We are literally not letting people reach their full potential from the moment they drink that fluoridated water or get that fluoride treatment at the dentist. And
I think on average it's about 10 basis points of your IQ, which is significant. And if you move that bell curve by 10 basis points, you're really impacting society in a really negative way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's it's an atrocity, actually. I feel like most
one thing we shared over at our channel a couple of weeks ago, I think, was a connection between fluoride/fluorine, a connection between that and other chemicals. It was
aluminum.
Aluminum was one, but also aspartame, right? Fake sugar. That when looked isolated, aspartame might not appear bad, but when you combine it with the fluorine you're getting in your water, the fluoride and the fluorine that you're getting in your water, it actually becomes highly toxic. And I think this goes to a greater problem, which is, everybody's so worried about, carbon emissions and how that's going to destroy the world. Well, there's a real toxic problem, right? It's in our food. We have fluorine in our water. We have GMOs in our food. Like, there are so many other things that are poisoning us that is not getting the attention that it deserves because everybody is so caught up in, quote, carbon emissions and how we're destroying the planet. So I don't know if that's an intentional distraction or what,
Well,
but there is a serious poisoning going on.
It might be, or it could be the fact that there's so much lithium, which they're finding in the water supply because of a number of reasons, that we're all just too dulled down to care or do anything about it. It's like we care for a moment and then we're distracted or we forget. Or, as understandable, life happens and you have to go about living your day and you don't have time to dive into stuff like this like we do. But it's a combination of a lot of those things. It wasn't long ago when we did that piece on all the plastics and toxic chemicals that are in our houses, in our rugs, our clothes, our furniture, our detergents, our soaps, and other things like that, and how there are ways you can, be smart with your, with the products that you choose to bring into your home and other things like that. It's quite the topic.
And just a follow-up on the aluminum is that fluoride naturally binds with aluminum. So if it's in your body, it's going to find a place to put itself.
And it is the most electronegative element that is found in our bodies, which means that scavenging it out of our bodies is exceptionally difficult because head-to-head against any one element or most compounds even, the bond that fluoride has already made inside your body wins. So that's rough too. So kind of difficult.
And most other countries don't use fluoride in their water supply.
Most do not. Most do not because, well, I mean, it's weird because it's not unknown by mainstream science that there's this toxicity problem. It's just there has been such a push in the dentistry world for decades and decades, and the accepted use of it, etc. And even though they don't fluoridate the water in some other countries, I know a lot of those other countries that don't fluoridate their water, they do have prominent dental fluoride standards as well. So like they do have the high fluoride dental treatments as well in a lot of those countries. And so it's like there's varying levels of ignorance/stupidity across the world, all culminating here in the United States at the top of the mountain, at the top of ignorance and stupidity in this regard, where we just can't seem to get enough of the stuff that is bad for us.
And you know who we can thank for that?
Which part? For the aluminum one, it's the melons and the folks at Alcoa.
No, the fluoride.
Oh, the fluoride.
Introducing fluoride in our water supply.
I have no idea.
That was Edward Bernays, and they had a fluoride problem.
That's right.
It was killing animals and things from the aluminum plants and such, and so they needed to get rid of it. So bring in Edward Bernays to sell it to the dentistry.
All right. So, but the guy who got him to do it, it was the folks at Alcoa. So we're actually talking about the same stuff there. I was talking about the rich folks who needed to make it happen, and you were talking about the loudmouth without morals who actually did make it happen. We call those lobbyists, by the way, for those who are new to the show. Oy. Anything last on fluorine there?
Yeah, this might even be a question for Tony. So, Tony, do you think any level of fluorine or fluoride exposure is okay? So, for example,
Yes.
Let's say once a year you go to the dentist and they use that fluoride treatment, but you're not getting it in your water and you're not getting it in your food and stuff like that. Would that be okay, or is it sort of a strict no?
Well, generally, it's not necessary. If you have healthy teeth and you have a healthy body, you don't need to do it. However, there may be some cases for it, but know that it's topical. Right? It's a topical thing. You put it on your teeth, you spit it out, you brush with it, you spit it out. You don't consume it. So that's the big difference, is putting it into your body versus on a certain part of your body that's not getting in there. So I would say, there is no safe level of consumption, but there is certainly a safe level for certain circumstances. And it's limited. It's not a broad swath like we're doing with medicating everyone from babies to, elderly with the water supply.
Yeah, and
that's a really good point, because you're drinking the water. You're actually putting it into your body versus spitting it out. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Right. We don't drink sunscreen to get protection from the sun. We put it on water and then we wash it off.
Yeah, there's a tiny amount, very tiny amount in natural spring water. So the chances are that that's what our body, uses for its fluoride needs, and that is literally a virtually nothing amount. It is. It was the need to deal with the teeth problems that came from cheap sugar candy products. That's what really drove this deal with the devil for fluoride in the dentist industry. That, and they didn't really know how bad it was for the brain. They didn't have those studies. They may have known it wasn't great, but they didn't probably know the full extent. And that, combined with the fact that, and there's a reason why the people have tried to tie the sugar lobby to the fluoride industry and other things like that, because without fluoride, their product truly does devastate America and America's children. But that's problems compounded on problems, which is, of course, a lot of things we're dealing with nowadays. Anyway, I want to take another quick little break here. We'll come back. There's no link for this last part, but something interesting. We've had 22 episodes in the Catastrophe series thus far. I haven't really gone ahead and broken out exactly what I think. Part of the purpose has been to give a lot of different perspectives with a lot of different ideas, such that if you've been paying attention, you notice that no two people think the exact same thing of the Catastrophe. So might as well toss my hat in the ring there and let anybody else on the call who's willing to do that as well. So again, long, painful break for us. It'll just seem like a few seconds for you. Be right back. All right, we are back. I hope that nobody aged 20 to 30 years during that long break. Let's just jump right into this. So what I have learned based on investigating this myself for a number of years, and based on bringing together a number of the top catastrophists on the planet for this series, not only in interviews, but last month at Observing the Frontier, our annual conference, is that there is almost certainly a galactic trigger. And given the fact that we don't see a whole lot of, super wave outbursts, we see them at the photon level in ultraviolet and optical. I really have to wonder if this is something about us crossing the central electric field of the galaxy. Just like the rings and the material hug that central electric field around Saturn, just like the planets do it around stars and stars do it around the galaxy. There's an electric field separating the northern and southern hemisphere magnetic fields of all of these celestial environments. And that electric field in the center is not only the magnetic reversal point of the galaxy. It's not the galactic equator. Some people hear, we're crossing the galactic plane. Well, that doesn't mean anything if there's not a magnetic difference there. The magnetic difference is at the electric field, which isn't a flat plane. It ripples out, probably at the galactic level. We notice small ripples at the planetary ring level, but it's not enough for you to really tell. When you're looking at the planets and their different inclined orbits, you see it a little bit better. At the heliospheric, the sun's current sheet that goes throughout the solar system, that one's really wavy. And one would have to imagine you scale that up to the galactic level, and it's exceptionally wavy, such that it doesn't matter if you're north, south, right in the middle. When this wave goes by, it goes by. And it goes by much, much faster than you're going around. So, for example, Earth orbits the sun in 1 year. We go 7 degrees above, 7 degrees below the sun's equator. In doing so, we cross the sun's equator twice. But the sun's heliospheric current sheet slaps by us every 2 weeks. Who knows what that is on the galactic level? But I do believe it does trigger the sun. I do believe that there is a ton of dust and asteroidal material there, which complicates the matter. Something like superflare activity or even a recurrent micronova are not impossible from the sun, especially since we now know that there are 12 to 13 recurrent nova, not only in our galaxy, but in the Magellanic Cloud, and one, at least, in Andromeda that we know of as well. And astronomers, most of them believe that the list will balloon to many, many, many stars in the future, as most do not have such short cycles that we have already been able to see them go boom. Most of the ones that we have seen go boom and are not destroyed, they think will go boom again. And ones that we haven't even seen go boom once will be thought to be single nova events for hundreds of thousands of years until they go boom again. Who says it couldn't be our sun as well, in a very micro-like fashion that would account for the solar system-wide chaos, where you do have some kind of trigger that can affect the sun. You know, when Earth goes through the heliospheric current sheet, we can have geomagnetic disruptions. What happens if you do that to the sun at a galactic level and you get a solar magnetic disruption from the galaxy? No need to have a core shockwave hit you. No need for gamma rays to be spewing out. Just go from the north magnetic fields to the south magnetic fields through that electric field in the center. It's kind of a double whammy because you've got the magnetic reversal and you hit the energy point, that electric field right in the middle of it. And it just so happens at the galactic scale, there's going to be a ton of photoionized dust and probably asteroids as well. And given the fact that we know it happens cyclically on the planet Earth in terms of when the sun's current sheet hits us, it could be cyclical from the galaxy as well. And that would actually be a way to explain literally every last part of the evidence on Earth, on the sun, the glass beads, the asteroids, the stories of the sun, the stories of the planets in chaos, as if the sun going micronova couldn't do something to Mercury or any other planet that was close in nearby. I think that the Catastrophe Cycle series gives more than enough evidence of all of this. And unfortunately, it does look like time is short, if not for us, then for our immediate generations following. Does anybody else want to go ahead and jump in with a different hypothesis or any comments or anything like that?
I might just say that it's a very, very complex system that's going on. And by that, I mean, the evidence is muddled. It's a very target-rich environment. And I think that there possibly, and an explanation for all the different theories and the diverse hypotheses that are out there, is that there are multiple events and potentially multiple cycles of things happening. And some cycles and some events might be small, they might be local, planetary or even just solar system wide events, or they have just to do with the planet Earth, for example. But that I do agree that passing through that sheet of electromagnetic energy at a galactic level might be the big cycle, the ones that everybody's looking at. So whenever people listen to theories and different ideas about this, I think you need to have sort of a diverse, open mind to this, that while one person might be right, the other person the other person next to them might also be right, because there could be multiple events, there'd be multiple cycles, multiple theories, all sort of working in this complex, network sort of system that's going on.
Dude, you are in just total summary mode today. I'm loving this. So, indeed, one of the things we talk about a good bit in the Catastrophe Cycle is that there is this big one, but probably on the half harmonics, the quarter harmonics, the 8th and 16th harmonics, there are lesser extent events as well, and those might be based on magnitude, or they might be based on scaling down to just at a stellar level, or just at a planet level, or even at a more localized level. Absolutely accurate. Very good point. There's a lot of moving parts to this, but as I said about Bright Insight earlier, I do believe that we communicate the information pretty well, and it paints a very good picture. When I say it's communicated well, not just such that you understand what's being said, but episode after episode and watching the whole thing, you can really put it all together. You don't need to have a physics PhD. You don't need to be an expert in this or that. It's really the kind of thing that our ancestors, our uneducated, wise but ignorant ancestors, fully grasped and understood. And you can too. Anyway, that's our public fly on the wall for at least the next 6 months. We are going to do this again, of course, next week right here on the website. We will continue up with the Earth catastrophe topic here on YouTube, and whenever it is you are listening to this, we'll see you in the morning right here. Be safe, everyone.